Welcome to the Birth Lounge Podcast, an empowering space for expecting and new parents to hear candid conversations with experts, support your mental health, and learn the tips and tricks that thousands of parents have used to craft their ideal birth. We will answer all of your questions, the scary ones and the weird ones, to help calm your fears and feel confident going into your birth. I'm going to help you redefine what birth and motherhood looks like and how to embrace your journey. I've intentionally crafted a list of experts to help you navigate pregnancy, explore your birth options, and plan for postpartum so that it can be a time of soaking in your tiny human. We're going to go there on all the hard topics so that you can dive deep into finding your confidence and freeing yourself from fears around birth. With over 10 years of experience in family education and a master's degree in human development and family studies, I created this podcast as a way to share the resources parents need to make educated and informed decisions about their care in pregnancy and childbirth. This is a birth community driven by evidence-based information and research in hopes to help you explore your options, understand your rights, and know what choices you have along the way when it comes to birth and beyond. I'm your host, HeHe. Now let's get to the good stuff. Laura, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. I'm very excited to have you to the show. I have shared with you that this is not really a topic that I know too much about. I am starting to learn about fertility. It's where I'm at in my personal life. We have had a ton of requests from our followers on social media and our listeners to the podcast, and even people who are inquiring if we do this work. And I'm really new to this conversation, so I'm really excited to have you on and talk through the options that we have once we've made kind of the decision to go with a donor and a donor conceived egg. Is that what you would say? You can tell I don't even know the language. So why don't you start us off with maybe your story? You have
Sure.
children who are donor conceived, and how did you get to where you are now?
Yeah. First, want to let you know that you are not alone when you say that you don't know too much about this topic, because there aren't a lot of people out there who are familiar with donor conception is the best, I think, umbrella term to call. And donor conception would be donor egg, donor sperm, donor embryo. And like I said, you're not alone. And I find that it is definitely being talked about a lot more. But when I started navigating my own journey for me, it was donor egg, and that was 2017. There was very little out there. And I felt so nervous and isolated. I had plenty of friends who had gone through IVF and built their families that way. So when I was starting IVF, I was like, okay, here we go. Can't wait to get pregnant. But IVF with my own eggs didn't work for me. And at the time, I think I was about to turn 41. We discovered that I had a significantly low ovarian reserve. And we discovered that with a blood test. It's a pretty basic fertility blood test that tests the AMH hormone. And anyone who's starting IVF or fertility treatments has probably had this blood test done. Mine was significantly lower than even they expected of me, around 40. And when you have low AMH, it doesn't necessarily mean you can't get pregnant. It just means that your ovarian reserve, your number of eggs, which is finite for a woman, you can improve the quality of your eggs, but not necessarily the quantity of your eggs. You are born with the amount of eggs that you're going to receive. And that number plummets after puberty, really, and then it continues to get lower and lower. And so when you're 40, then that number is quite low, and it can affect how you're going to respond to fertility treatments. And it was worth giving it a shot. So we did try IVF, and it I did not respond to the medications, which was not shocking, but certainly disappointing. And after working through that and trying what we might say we, I mean, my partner, my husband and I, what we were comfortable with. We did 3 rounds of IVF with my own eggs, and we're not able to create an embryo, a transferable embryo. I think we got 1 embryo throughout the entire process, and that embryo was genetically tested and came back positive for an chromosome abnormality, which would have resulted in a chromosome defect that ultimately would have led to likely pregnancy loss. And so we decided not to transfer that embryo. Once we got to the 3rd egg retrieval, I was done. I was, confident that this was not going to be the answer of how we got pregnant. And I'm simplifying a lot of this. So this was probably a period of about 12 months of trying different fertility treatments and doing the 3 egg retrievals. And at the end of that, saying, okay, this isn't going to work. So what's next? And I had a great conversation with my husband where we basically agreed that nothing was off the table. We felt strongly that we were going to, we tried this path. We would talk about adoption. We would talk about donor conception. We would also talk about how we could lead very fulfilling lives without children if that was our path, but that's not where we were. So the next thing we decided to try was donor egg. And when I made the decision to, okay, this is what we're going to do, a feeling came over me. Such a strong intuition came over me that this was our answer. And I think I even said to my doctor when we called him, this is how I'm going to get my baby. This is how I'm going to get my family. And he said, okay, let's do it. We identified our donor not long after that, and we found her through an agency. She was, I believe, 26 at the time. We chose an anonymous donor. So I had seen her pictures and I have read lots of paperwork and some essays that she wrote. I've talked to the agency who she worked with, and I've never had a direct conversation, but we've talked through the agency and felt very strongly about that particular donor, and the girl knocked it out of the park. She had a great cycle, and then when she had her egg retrieval 5 days later, we did a fresh transfer, and my son was born 9 months later. And so that was my answer, and that's how I became a mom. I simplified a lot of that. There was a lot of waiting and testing and complex logistics that went along the way. But I knew, I think soon after that, that I learned so much in that time period that now I want to help other people. So I believe, let's see, my son was born in August, and I think he was just over a year. It was the following a year later in that fall that I wrote an article, pitched it to a women's online magazine to share my story. And I really felt like I was writing a piece that I would have wanted to read when I was going through this. How, you know, I was so lost. What's my answer? IVF didn't work for me. What's going to work for me? How am I going to become a mom? And when this option presented itself, part of me was like, can we do this? Can I ask another woman to donate DNA and eggs so I could have a baby? Can we afford this? How is my family going to respond to this? Are they going to question these choices? And so I did have to work through a lot of that. The answers presented themselves to me. The answers were yes, I can ask another woman to donate DNA. It's actually quite easy to ask another woman to donate her eggs because there's a lot of great options out there, a lot of really wonderful people out there who are willing to donate their eggs. Could we afford it? Thankfully, the answer was yes. And we were able to use some help from our insurance. Some things were covered, a lot wasn't, and very fortunate that we did have the means to move forward with that treatment. And then that other question of how will our families respond? Our families responded like, yay, we're having a baby. Not, oh, you used a donor, but we're having a baby. It was all good news. It was just such a positive experience for me. And I wanted others to know that this path could be so positive. And so that's when I started to share my story, started to talk to other women, and I would say unofficially, very casually coach them through their own journey, through their own process, because I really could have used somebody to guide me the way that I guide these women. And then after that, my story continued to become more complicated. I got pregnant on my own, which was very confusing and unexpected, and unfortunately lost the pregnancy as I was learning that I was pregnant. And so that was emotionally very complicated, as you can imagine. Around then, I decided that, okay, we're ready to have another baby. And so we did a frozen embryo transfer with another embryo from that donor cycle. And I got pregnant right away. And oh my gosh, can you believe how lucky we are that we got pregnant right away? And an ultrasound revealed that the embryo split and we were carrying identical twins. And then a follow-up ultrasound revealed that we had lost that pregnancy. And that, again, was a whole new level of complexity. The idea that I was carrying twins, and that was obviously not part of our plan. And once we got used to the idea of, oh my gosh, we're going to be a family of 5, then it was turning around and managing a traumatic pregnancy loss at 10 weeks. That at any length of time, that can be traumatic. But for me, I was on this roller coaster that came to a screeching halt, and I am still managing some of the grief from that. It took us another 3 from frozen embryo transfers to get pregnant again, including one transfer that resulted in a negative pregnancy test, another transfer that resulted in a biochemical loss, and then we were pregnant again. And while I felt a lot of hope and positivity about that pregnancy, it also came along with some anxiety because I had experienced all of these losses and working through that. I think at that point, part of me was saying, I feel so lucky to be a mom and to have the opportunity I feel so lucky to have my son, but haven't I paid my dues? Why is this happening? And okay, maybe we will have one child, and that will be wonderful. But I really did not feel like our family was complete yet. And if I asked that question, why is this happening? Eventually I got the answer, because once I experienced all of that, I now feel like I have these stories to tell, and I can stand next to women who are navigating that same painful process and let them know that they're not alone. And I've been there too. And this is how I managed it. Let me help you manage it. And so that is basically how I came to become a coach. I knew that I had a lot of strategies, a lot of experience, a lot of answers to how can we make this process less terrible, less shitty. Can I say shitty on your podcast? Yes, I can.
You can say whatever you want to say. Yeah.
Why this, a lot of people will say, IVF, it sucks. It is shitty. How can we make it suck less? And so I developed positive fertility to make it suck less.
Love that.
Yeah. And so when I think back on my journey, my children, so now I have two children. I have a little boy, he'll be 6 next week. And my little girl, who is spicy as they come, just turned 3. And they are exactly who I was supposed to parent and exactly who I was supposed to be mom to. And they wouldn't be here in any other scenario but this one. It took 3 to make these people. The sperm from my husband, the egg from our donor, and our family, our parenting are creating these people. And that's exactly who they're supposed to be. And that is just such a beautiful concept to me that I want to share that with other people. But also, this journey was meant to happen to me so I could help other women.
I
And
love
yeah.
your story. That is like, it's the storyline of rags to riches, but you went from like dazed and confused of, oh my God, to doula of fertility. You're dueling people through this really tough time that is, in the grand scheme of things, new and doesn't have a lot of answers, doesn't have a lot of resources, may not actually be even a lot of access depending on where you live.
Yes.
And so I think what you're doing is really special. I have a lot of questions that I wrote down when you were talking. So I want to start with what people should be considering when they are thinking through whether an egg donor is right for them. Not once you've decided, but when you're on that process of, oh, where do we start? Should we look into egg donor? Should we look into sperm donor? Should we look into a donor conceived embryo? Like, where do we start? Where did you guys start?
That's a great question because I think that's the first question that a lot of people feel like maybe this is my answer, but gosh, where do I start? And the first place I tell people to start is at their clinic. If they are already trying to get pregnant with their own eggs or doing IVF, starting at your own clinic and seeing what resources are available. My clinic offered a seminar for people interested in donor egg, and they do something similar for other types of donor conception. And that made me feel like, okay, this is like step number 1. And then they broke it down into, okay, here's what would be next for you. And there are all kinds of decisions to make. But you start with, is this going to be right for me? And one of the first things is to learn about it. So it's not some kind of abstract concept. It is learning about what that means and what the process looks like and what some of the options are. Another thing that I tell people to do is go ahead and go online and visit some different donor egg or donor sperm agencies. In some clinics, some IVF clinics they have their own in-house donors, which is really nice because then you don't have to do additional testing and you know that those donors are approved by your clinic. And so there's a lot of advantages to that. You can ask for access to that and what donors are available to you. So you can see what might a donor that I would use look like, physically look like, or just in general, what might that be? I liked looking at through the agencies and like literally looking at those donors. It made me connect that I could see that like using one of these women and like I would find someone and be like, she looks like a really lovely person. And I can see connections. Her eyes look a little bit like mine. Her personality seems a little bit like mine. And that kind of made me connect a little bit better. I do think another place to start is having an open conversation with your partner if you're getting pregnant with a partner to talk openly about it, because having these open vocal conversations opens your mind a little bit. When it's things are stewing around in your head, they become big and abstract and scary. But if you talk about it, what does it feel like to talk about it? And does it become, what does it sound like to you? And I share this with all of my clients all the time, talking about things that are taking up space in your head, journaling about them or talking openly about them makes it less scary because you see it differently. And so what does it feel like when you talk about it? Does it start to feel like this could work? Or does it feel like I don't know, it doesn't feel good to me right now? In which case, I would encourage someone to keep talking about it if you want it to be your answer, or maybe it's simply not the right choice for you. I think it's really important. I feel strongly that it's important that a woman or families take some time to grieve their vision of what building a family was going to look like. I think that's really important. I at first did not give myself the opportunity to do that. I was just like, I want to get pregnant. Let's use a donor. And I think I wouldn't change anything because I chose the donor that was perfect for us. But I do think that I struggled with some of my own insecurities in this process when I didn't really go deep. I don't think that I really went deep enough into allowing myself to grieve what I thought that this journey was going to look like. And I thought that it was going to pass on my own DNA. I thought maybe I might have a little girl that looked like me or that had blue eyes like me, and while my daughter shares both my children share a lot of my qualities, I see families where they clearly look alike, and I think, oh, nobody looks at my kids and thinks that they look alike. And I don't know, sometimes that perception hits me funny, and I wonder if I should maybe do a little journaling on that.
Dig
That
into
being said,
that a little bit.
yeah, that being said, I've had plenty of people say, "Oh my gosh, she is such your mini you," and I was like, "Oh, funny, yeah, okay." She's usually dancing when they say that, and in a lot of ways, she totally is. And I made some decisions about my donor that I think were based on I wanted them to look like me or to have qualities that were similar to mine.
So, what were
And
some things that you were asking when you were going through that process? You've already made the decision to use a donor.
yeah,
Now you're looking through the donors. What were the questions that you and your husband were talking about that you were thinking about in your head that did you get to have a discussion with the donors before any of this? How does that work?
so I chose an anonymous donor. And I think I would have entertained a known donor or a non-anonymous donor. I'm going to take a side note to explain those three options. So in 2017, when I was searching for a donor, most donors were anonymous. So that would mean I do not know their name. We do not have conversations. We do not meet. I saw pictures of my donor. I read questionnaires that were completed by my donor, and I had the opportunity to ask questions to my donor through the agency that we worked with. I worked with a private agency that had all anonymous donors, or at the time they had all anonymous donors. And the assumption or the agreement is that we will not contact one another directly. Now, it is 2024, and if my children decide that they want to do 23andMe or Ancestry.com and learn more about or find their donor's family, there is no stopping them. And I'm confident that our donor knows that, but we both signed a contract that we would not contact one another directly. That my children can, after they turn, I believe, 18, they can ask the agency for the donor's contact information. The agency would contact the donor and say, these donor conceived or children conceived through your donor cycle are looking for your contact information. So they can work that out. But again, there'll be no stopping them if they want to. So, and the world knows that. The another option that's out there is a non-anonymous donor, which is basically there would be some contact where I would potentially talk to the donor. I would have talked to them. Maybe there is a exchange of information, and at any point my children would have access to that. And I think that is becoming more common in donor conception, or at least for egg donors. And then the other option is a known donor, when the donor would be someone that was already in our life, perhaps a relative or a friend that we chose. And so some families go this route in order to have a genetic connection. And I talk to families that are looking to go that route. That comes with its own set of complexities. And that while it might seem like the obvious route to go, then you have to make sure that there's an understanding of the role of the donor, that they're the egg donor and that the intended parents are the parents. And so you still have to do legal paperwork and contracts and medical testing. Just because they say, yeah, sure, I'll be your donor, doesn't mean that
They can.
it's the right. It doesn't mean that they can, or that it's the right answer. And psychological testing needs to be done. That person needs to talk to a therapist to make sure that they understand that what becoming an egg donor entails. And that would be the case for all those options. Like I said, we ended up going the route of an anonymous donor. And at the end of the day, I think that our donor was an anonymous donor, not necessarily we wanted an anonymous donor, and so that's why we picked her. And so we did not, to answer your original question, we did not have a conversation with her. I did have a couple of questions, and I have had questions since that I've been able to reach her through the agency. And I believe at this point they have a portal that you can have direct conversations that are still anonymous. But the questions that I had were, I wanted to make sure that I wanted to understand why they chose to be a donor. I wanted to know more about who they were and what their plans were. Like I said, she was 26 when she donated, and that was in 2017. She was in grad school, and very bright woman who loved learning. She loved going to school, and I really admired that. Also, she was athletic and shared talents in sports that were similar to my husband's athletic career. And so we liked that. I thought she was beautiful, but like in a very approachable way. She has the most beautiful blue eyes. That was very important to me. I have blue eyes. My husband has brown eyes, and I just felt very confident that if my donor has blue eyes, then there's a chance my children will have blue eyes, and everyone will say that they got them from me. That was so important to me when I started this part of my journey. And that is almost, it's laughable to me now because it is so not important to me. But at the same time, I think that having that priority, I validate that. I understand why that was a priority to me. And spoiler alert, neither of my children have blue eyes. As a matter of fact, my son has these dark brown eyes that are stunning against his coloring. And my daughter has these big caramel colored eyes that they're perfect for that. As far as I'm concerned, they're the two most beautiful humans on the planet. And so I wouldn't change a thing about what they looked like. And I like to tell that story that was so important to me that my donor had blue eyes. I filtered everyone, must have blue eyes. And that was what was important to me. And that isn't what happened, but we gave it a shot. Apparently, they did not get the recessive gene.
Blue did not win out. I'm so sorry for that.
Yeah, but like I said, I would not
They're
change.
perfect anyway.
They're
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah. I mean,
So,
it's very similar to the idea of you having the expectations of when and how you get pregnant, and
yes.
your perfect children ended up finding you anyway.
I think it's a very relatable part of my story.
Yeah.
Clients or people that just reach out to me on social media who want to talk about donor conception, they'll say, does it make me shallow that what my donor looks like is such a priority, or that I'm only looking at donors with this color eyes or this color hair or these features? And I've said, no, it's so natural. Of course, we want to choose a donor that we see ourselves in. And that's okay. You're going to find someone who matches all of your criteria. And I talk about, I think it's a good exercise for two or for someone pursuing donor conception, or if with a partner, both people pursuing donor conception, to list out on either type out or write out priorities, like what you want to look for in a donor. And then you put those lists together and you come up with the common denominators, and you get this person that you're imagining to be, and then you go and you find her, and you'll find her. And it might take a little while, and you might have to look at a couple of different agencies, but you'll find her. And when you do, it's just, oh, there's our donor. And then, yeah, that's exactly how it happened for us. I did all of the work. And then my husband, I said, I think I had four. Here are the four women that I would consider to be my top choices. And will you accept this, Rose? And he looked through and he said, I think this one is the obvious choice, which was also my number one choice. And I was like, okay, good. Let's ask
Do
her.
it. Yeah, let's
Will
do
you be
it.
our donor? And I still have the email where the agency emailed me back and they said, she accepted this afternoon, is what they said to me. And I was like, oh, it's happening.
We're gonna have
And then, yeah. So
I want to know what kind of questions were on the questionnaire that you got. What kind of questions did the agency ask to give you a good insight into who these donors were?
that's a great question. There were two types of questions. One were like medical questions. What
Sure.
blood type are you? Your height, your weight, do you wear glasses? What age did you get your period? Where have you any kind of mental health, sharing any kind of mental health? I don't remember how exactly that they worded it, journey. Did you have your tonsils removed? Do you have asthma? Their whole list of like medical history, family medical history. what your siblings, how tall are your siblings, what color eyes do your siblings have, all of this information, all of that. Does anyone have ADD? Does anyone have history of this or that? How do you have grandparents? How old did your grandparents live? Like all of it. And like all of that medical history stuff. And then things like, what were your favorite subjects in school? What are your favorite hobbies? Tell us about what is your favorite thing to do? How do you like to relax? What's your favorite book? What's your favorite movie? And space to just write what their thoughts were. Why are you choosing to be a donor? And I'm trying to remember, I can actually see in my head because I've read the questionnaire so many times. And a lot of them are typed, but mine is handwritten, and I don't even know for sure if it's her handwriting because it's obviously printed out. And who's ever handwriting it is atrocious. And I have terrible handwriting myself. Like it's barely legible. And that is honestly one of the things that attracted me to this donor. Like she has flaws. You cannot read her writing. I bet she turns out to be a doctor someday. And but there was opportunity for her to talk about one of the things that she said is how much she loves celebrating the holidays with her family and decorating, going home to her family and decorating the tree as a family every year. And things like that, and her favorite books. And she loves to read. I love to read. One of her favorite books was a favorite book of mine, and things like that helped me connect with who she is. And then what I got from this questionnaire was that she loves her family, that she did have flaws. She was somewhat shy. She was a bit of a perfectionist where she got really good grades in school, and it caused she would experience some anxiety if she wasn't perfect in school. That is not an experience that I had growing up, where I found academics to be quite challenging for me and wish that I had a better academic history. And so where I related to how she was sensitive and didn't want to disappoint anybody, I admired that academics was so important to her. She had a dog that she loved. She loved hiking with her dog. And I was like, yes, of course she did. Who doesn't love hiking with her dog? And I really liked her. And so it was things that got to know their health history and who they were in terms of what they looked like and who they were physically, but also who they were, what was important to them, what were their priorities, what were they like. I remember having a conversation with my husband and him saying, I think at the time I was having a difficult time with what if I don't have anything in common with our kids because they're good at soccer and science. And he said, but you're raising these children. They are going to receive so many of your qualities because your best qualities aren't going to be found in DNA. They're going to be found in like the way that you raise them. They're going to learn compassion and patience, and they're going to have a great sense of humor, and they're going to be friendly and open, and they're going to get all of that from you, and then potentially also be good at math, which they would not get from you. Okay, that's a really good point. Like my best qualities, right? Like my best qualities are not necessarily going to be found in the DNA from an egg. They're going to be found when I'm an example of being a compassionate person, and the way that I treat my friends and the warm way that I get to know people, and how I do voices for the characters when I read to them at night and when I sing at the top of my lungs in the car. That's what they're learning from me. And those are my best qualities.
Aw, I could just cry like thinking about it. I love that so
Mm.
much. What a
Yeah,
sweet
me too.
relationship, right? I have a question about the cost and the legality. So you have mentioned
Yes.
contracts a couple of times, and I think my questions around that are who draws these up? Do you need to hire a lawyer? Are there things that you're negotiating with your donor, or are they all pretty like cookie cutter? Is it very favorable to your donor or very favorable to you? How does all that work in terms of, I guess, like legality and then also the
Yeah.
cost?
It is recommended to, and most agencies will require you to have your own representation. And so we did hire someone who specialized in third party reproductive law. A lot of family lawyers also have that, can do that specialty as well. And so we did use a boilerplate contract.
Mm.
And so the donor had their representation and we had our representation and they talked together. And so it's not necessarily that anyone is favored. And there was a template for the contract. So we basically followed the template for, and it was things like there weren't a lot of decisions that we had to make. I think off the top of my head, it was something that we had to agree on was that if she was to move, that she needed to provide her new address to the agency. And so if for some reason we had to get in touch with her for some reason, if, and that would be both ways, if, oh, that was another part of it. If we discovered some sort of genetic, I don't know, scenario or not necessarily problem, but anything genetic with the children that we would let the agency know so they could let her know, like a genetic heart defect or something like that, which thankfully was not the case. And same thing with her. If she learned anything that was genetic, she would share that with she would share that with the agency who would share that with us. So that's in the contract. And if anyone changed their address or contact information, address, email address, whatever, then that we would share that with the agency so anyone could get in touch with anyone. And that, like I said, I believe it's at 18, which was the template age, my children could request contact information from the agency. And that, so that was part of the contract. And I feel like those were like the three main things. And then the financial, the compensation, there is, she was compensated, which was dictated by the agency. And so that was part of the contract. And the fact that we weren't going to, neither party was going to contact the other. I wasn't going to go and try to find her, and she wasn't going to go and try to find us. And of course, the fact that after the egg retrieval is done, the eggs were our property. And so she could not do the egg retrieval and then change her mind that, you know what, I didn't realize that I was going to want these eggs, but I changed my mind. I want them now and I'm gonna get pregnant. Or the embryos are our property. And so that was, sure, it was part of the contract that she was going to follow the protocol and be compliant with her medication instructions. That was part of the contract as well. She was going to go to all of her appointments, all of that information to make sure that the cycle was as successful as possible. That was likely part of all of the contracts as well.
Mm. Is there a rough estimate that people can expect a range to maybe spend on a donor? And I assume if access is hard and there's travel involved, the couple would probably be responsible for the travel to and from. You're
Correct.
responsible for medications. And in addition to that, the egg donor is compensated financially. Is that correct?
Correct. So the range is enormous.
Mm.
based on a lot of different factors. So different agencies pay different amounts. And for the agency that we used was rather exclusive to when I say that, I mean that they were very picky about their donors, where they did have to be a certain age. They had to be, many of them were students, and they were academically focused. A lot of them were were at Ivy League schools or going to Ivy League schools. So they, I have a hard time saying that the quality of these donors was very high, but it fit into a window of what a lot of intended parents are looking for. They were very attractive, and because they were using very exclusive donors in a lot of different qualities, their fees were a bit higher. The agency fee, there's an agency fee for all of the logistics and all of the paperwork and such, and then the donor fee. And that will change. Most agencies have both an agency fee and a donor fee, but the fees will vary from different agencies. And also there's a higher fee for often for a repeat donor, a donor who has done an egg retrieval before and had a successful cycle. There could be a different fee and then our donor actually was a first-time donor, and we did not decide to use her because she was a first-time donor. And a lot of people want a repeat donor because they are confident that they're going to do well. But our donor just happened to be the person we picked happened to be doing their first cycle. I want to also clarify that we did what's called a fresh cycle. See, I told you there are so many options and like different levels of the logistics. So we did a fresh cycle, which meant that we chose our donor once she finished with testing and doing all of the blood panels and the social testing and things like that. She did a fresh cycle with the same medications that anybody doing an IVF cycle would do. And we were given all of those eggs. And then we decided to do a fresh transfer. Similar to anybody's IVF cycle, we did a 5-day transfer from an embryo created from her cycle right away. You can also choose frozen eggs, which would mean that a previous cycle was done. Let's say a woman produces 18 eggs, gets 18 eggs that are mature eggs from an IVF cycle. They split those eggs into lots of, usually the number is somewhere between 6 and 8. And so they will split those eggs into lots, and you can purchase a lot of those eggs. So 6 to 8 frozen eggs. So that option's usually less expensive than a frozen cycle because you're not getting as many eggs, and also you're not paying necessarily for all of the fresh medications. That's already been done, and testing's already been done. So that's an option for somebody who isn't necessarily looking for more than one child. If they'd want one child, then they might do a frozen cycle, and those eggs would be thawed and then fertilized with sperm from their partner or from a sperm donor if you're going that route, and you can transfer one of those embryos. So that's an option as well. Sometimes it's an option you can do a frozen cycle and then get another lot from that same donor, but that's depends on the agency, on the donor, a handful of things. And so the pricing for the fees for that scenario is going to be different than with a fresh cycle.
How many times can someone donate, especially for a family that's thinking about wanting multiple children?
That's going to depend on, I have no idea. I can
Yeah.
look it up.
No, no
But
need. That's probably a better question for someone who's been a donor in the past or someone
yeah,
who is,
right.
a physician that's in the IVF world.
Likely it would depend on the agency, but often it depends on the donor, on what they're comfortable with. It is very different from a sperm donor that can donate over and over again, and more policies are being put in place because that's becoming a bit of an issue with donor sperm. But some women they want to donate once and then they won't do it again. And I've heard of other women having more than maybe 3 or 4 cycles. But there are certainly boundaries. Is that the word I'm looking for? This is getting messy, so I'm gonna.
Boundaries definitely fit there for sure. It really does. So I think my last question is even messier and probably very controversial, but are you open with your children about this? Is being conceived by an egg donor part of their story? Do you talk about it? And if you do, how do you incorporate that? If you don't, are there any plans in the future to share it with your children?
Mm. So this is actually something that I feel really strongly about
Okay.
and have for a long time. I wasn't, and I'll be honest, when we started this, I wasn't sure how I felt about that. And then after talking when we started this process, it was my clinic required me to sit down with a counselor to talk about donor conception and being a parent to a donor conceived child. And they made it really clear that the data and data talking with donor conceived children, basically all of the research points to the idea that it is crucial to be honest with donor conceived children about their story, their conception story. And once I understood that, I felt more comfortable about it. I will give myself some grace that, of course, it was confusing to me in the beginning because I wasn't sure how I felt about any of it.
Totally.
But once I did the work and took some time to think about it, it made perfect sense to me. First of all, it is their story, not mine. I am part of it, but it's their story. And what's really important to me is that they, as people, they are not just donor conceived children or the product of my donor cycle. They're people that they feel comfortable with their conception story and they're proud of it. I would never want them to think that it's something that I am ashamed of, that I wish that they were conceived in another way. So, how I talk about it, first of all, I started very early. I think when I was pregnant, I started buying books about, first of all, for me, how to talk to your donor conceived children, but also children's books about about sharing their story. And we have some favorites. And I started reading them out loud when I was pregnant. And then after they were born, when they were babies, reading to them, I would read these stories and tell them their story. So read the books as well as mommy and daddy wanted a baby so badly. And I will share that it was awkward. It was super awkward at first. But that's one of the reasons why I wanted to share the story with my babies as newborns and as infants, um, because I needed to get more comfortable with it. They did not care as an infant how awkward my stories were. They just wanted to hear my voice. And so it didn't matter. And now I'm a lot more comfortable with it. And so they know their story. Like I said, we have our favorites, and I try to, as I'm reading the book, bring in our personal story. Like, this is what it was like for me and you. Or do you want to look at pictures of mommy when she was pregnant with you? Or do you remember the name of the doctor that helped us? Things like that. And so now they love it. My 6-year-old just will ask questions about embryos, and to the point where it's almost okay, we'll see a woman who's pregnant and he'll ask me about the embryo, and I'm like, okay, don't be so clinical. um, but it's so cute, and they get excited that they understand, and it's very simple. My children are 3 and almost 6, and so we keep it simple right now, and as they get older, it gets a little bit more complex and we add more detail to it. I've started talking about what qualities they might have received from their donor. And I think my son has this beautiful blonde, brown, it's light brown now. It used to be blonde, wavy hair. The texture to his hair is just, it looks like he's had a blowout every day. And so I think that a lot of the texture from his hair he probably got from his donor. And so I share that with him. And what kind of other qualities do you think that you got from your donor? What kind of things do you like? Do you think that she likes too? Things like that. And it is getting a little bit more complex where no, I don't know her name. And if we wanted to learn that someday, then we could. But my commitment to them, to myself, to our story is that I support them in everything they want to know along the way. That is so important to me. Part of me does wonder if maybe I should have asked for more information, if I tried to have at least gone with a non-anonymous donor that maybe we would have had a little bit more communication with. So I could reach out, or they could reach out at any time, not when they turn a certain age. But I can't change that now. All I can do is support them along the way in anything that they want to know, and make sure that they know that we're navigating this together. At the end of the day, this is how, like, I brought them here. This is how they came to be. And like I said earlier, it took 3. It took mommy, it took daddy, it took our donor to create you. And that's exactly who you're supposed to be. And this is the family that we were supposed to have. And so that's the story that we'll share, and that's the information that we'll give them. And if they need more, then I will figure it out. I will make sure that they know that I support them in anything that they want to know about their story, because it's theirs.
Oh my gosh, I love your perspective so much. I think it's very easy as women, and as maybe everyone that goes through fertility treatments feels this way at some point, but it can be really easy to resent our bodies, or to believe that it's broken, to believe that it didn't do what it was supposed to do. But I love the perspective of, this is our story. We needed a third party. We needed an egg donor. And I have friends on both sides of the spectrum. I have friends that were conceived by donors in some sort of fashion, and then and they didn't know growing up. It was not talked about, and they have now found out as adults. And I have friends who have children conceived by donors in some sort of fashion, and they're my age, so I'm getting to watch them parent with this really open story. And oh, it's so different. And you can just see the difference in the stories, and how, if the people who are my age that were finding out they were donor conceived had the story that my friends who have donor conceived children now, if they could have had that, it would have made, I think, things a lot easier on this side.
I the the information that's out there, the data, the research, the interviews with donor conceived children, those who find out later or as adults, many of them do have a negative perspective on it, or a complicated one, because they do feel like they don't like it's a part of their story, a part of who they are was kept from them. And maybe not all, maybe some are like, oh, that's weird. I just, like I said, I didn't ever want it to be a surprise to my children. I never wanted to have a conversation that started with, there's something I need to tell you about who you are. I want them to grow up in a place where they know themselves as much as possible. Because it's so important for all of us as human beings to really figure out who we are. And if if this important part of how they were conceived was left out, I think that they would struggle with that. And I do think that a lot of donor conceived adults struggle with this. I someday my beautiful young children may be angsty teenagers who are angry with me for one reason or another, and this might be part of of creating their power struggle with me. Maybe it comes up, but I never want them to be able to say that I didn't support them and that I didn't share with them exactly who they are. I want them to know that I want to always be honest with them. And maybe stuff will come up that we all have to work through, but at least I know that I was honest and I know that I was always authentic in how we navigated this together.
I love that. I don't think there's any better way to build trust within your family than open communication and just being honest about how your family came to be and the special people that helped make you that family. It's not just
Right.
your donor too, right? Like your IVF doctors, and you get to know your
Yes.
nurses. You have a whole community of people. There are people in your community that are going through this with you at the same time.
And I do want to share that I do have this very positive and joyful perspective on all of this. But that took work to get there. And if someone is not feeling that right now, if they are pursuing donor conception or IVF in general and looking to pivot because what they're doing isn't working, if they're not feeling 100% positive, 100% joyful and good about the next steps, that's normal. And it is completely valid and understandable because it took a lot of work to get here. And I took a lot of conversations with my husband, and it took me a lot of time to get comfortable. And it also took me to get to the other side and find success in my family building. It's way easier to say, this is how we were meant to be, now that I have what was meant to be. When you're in it, it's harder to see all the positives. And so I want to make sure that anybody who's listening, I wish that I felt that good about my journey, knows that the way that you're feeling is okay. And my advice to them would be to allow yourself some grace, allow yourself some space to work through what it is that you are feeling, and connect with someone who has had a similar experience, or talk to people who have been there, who have had a similar journey or are having a similar journey, so you don't feel alone and you can really give yourself a safe space where you can talk it through, so you can find that place where you can say, yes, I feel good about this and I can move forward, because you owe yourself all of the options and you're deserving of all of the options to build that family.
Families come in all sorts of shapes and sizes and ways and all of that. Thank you so much for being here with me today, Laura. This has been so much fun. If people were interested in working with you for some of your coaching, if they wanted to connect with you on social media, if they wanted to learn more about your resources, where can people do that?
So you can find me at my website, which is Positive Fertility Coaching. That's all one word, positivefertilitycoaching.com. And I have all sorts of resources there, several free resources, as well as my blog is there. And I cover all the things that we talked about: IVF, preparing for IVF, donor conception, pregnancy after loss, processing loss. It's all there. And then my Instagram is at positive.fertility. And there's all sorts of support there as well. And if anyone is looking to connect with somebody about donor conception, then say hi and let's talk about it. And I know I'm an open book and happy to answer any questions anybody has.
Thank you so much. All right, you guys. I hope you guys learned as much as I did. I came to this conversation not really knowing that much, and I feel like I have so much more of a better handle on at least the top surface area of the options that we have when it comes to donor conceived children. There are obviously so many more layers to this, and we'll continue to dive in. So continue to come on back each week. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Be sure to follow Laura on social media, and you can find me at Tranquility by HeHe or at the.birth.lounge. Until next time, head to your app store and download the Birth Lounge app for evidence-based childbirth education and data-driven postpartum support delivered straight to your phone. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I truly do value this community and I love hanging out with you. You deserve to have a birth that you love with a provider that values your autonomy and respects informed consent. It's an honor to be your go-to gal when it comes to preparing for your baby. If you found today's episode helpful, share it with a friend. Share it with someone who could use evidence-based information to help them have an informed and confident birth. I'd love to hear what you have to say and read your sweet words. By leaving us a review, you are helping other expectant mamas and their families find the podcast so that we can reduce birth trauma and improve maternity care in the U.S. one birth at a time. If you're interested in joining the Birth Lounge, go to thebirthlounge.com. If you want to connect with me on socials, you can find me at Tranquility by HeHe on all platforms. Until next time, stay educated, stay supported, stay confident. Bye.